r/AskReddit, if a world war were to break out, which country would offer the greatest safety? I'm here and not telling you. Goodbye and best wishes mate. Cheers. Some South American country. Working on some farm in Uruguay for instance. Brazil. Neutral. Far away. Big, bigger than the contiguous United States. Self-sufficient in food, commodities, and energy and has big enough industrial base to provide the basics for a civilized society to function even if global supply chains are completely disrupted. Completely isolated from the rest of the world, Brazilian society would probably revert back to the 1960s tech level, at least initially, but it would still function. Steel mills would operate. Refineries would continue to output fuel, plastic and other chemicals. Cement would continue to be manufactured. Engines, tires, vehicle components, tractors, trucks, elevators, power plants, telecommunication systems, and even aircraft would continue to be manufactured, but all back at 1960s tech. Edit. Places like Australia and New Zealand might have their current infrastructure protected from attacks due to their location, but unlike Brazil, they lack the diversified industrial base to keep a modern society running, so if international trade came to a complete halt due to the war for an extended period of time, they would eventually have to revert back to something maybe a little better than the steam engine era. Places like Guam, Maldives, or similar remote areas would probably revert back to the Middle Ages or worse. Something unaligned in the global south. A poorer country with no oil or strategic ports. Probably Antarctica, or New Zealand. The United States. Y'all think 800 billion a year is for shit you've heard of? My sweet summer child. New Zealand by far. I've thought about this topic way too much. 1. It's the farthest away from any landmass that has any modern civilization. 2. The islands is mostly self-sustaining. 3. All fallout would miss the country cause New Zealand isn't in the southern jet stream. 4. There is nothing all that desirable about the land to any of the big powers. 5. It by far would have the best chance of surviving the climate changing after a nuclear war. Secondary. Svalbard. 1. It's the most northern place you can go. 2. It will be ignored as there is really no tangible assets there. I mean yeah, the Russians have a presence there but it's small and when war breaks out they are probably gonna be on their own. 3. It's not on the jet stream so little chance of fallout hitting the area. 4. If you can adapt and learn how to live in an Arctic climate you'll be fine for the most part. Third choice. Pitcairn Islands. 1. You will get some fallout but it won't be enough to cause any long-term harm as the island Adamstown is small enough. 2. Too far away for any tactical or military use. 3. Would be able to survive a climate shift. 4. You'd actually be benefiting the local populace. They have what I like to call the Amish problem. 5. It's self-sustaining. Also anywhere in South America would be a bad choice mainly because of trade winds carrying fallout from Australia if it were to get nuked or anywhere and depending on what time of year it is you might have fallout from Europe hit there. Read on how the Sahara affects the rainforest. There is a few other places like some the Pacific Island nations but your issue becomes. You could become a target as the US still has installations in various states of being mothballed ready to be reactivated should the need ever arise. Wake Island and Johnston Atoll is the two I know of. I know the Marshall Islands have a couple in their territory. Iceland. Uruguay or maybe southern Chile. There was a common story amongst young NZers in the 80s that both USA and USSR had nukes aimed at NZ. This was in case either side was losing they would nuke us so the other couldn't use us as a food source. Have no idea if this was true or not. Switzerland. They have nuclear bunkers with enough room for like 97% of the nation. And also, the Alps. There's a country that claims sovereignty, which is itself a boat in the ocean. There. We can just float out for a good long while, float back to check on things and leave again if necessary. *Edit spelling. America without a doubt. Canada is basically an unshakable ally. The absolute worst case scenario would be peaceful ambivalence with them. Mexico is a non-threat. That leaves any potential enemy needing to cross either an entire ocean of water or the vast expanse of Canada to enact a strike. The invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated that the Patriot system can easily destroy modern hypersonic missiles, and those missiles are the exact same ones that Russia would use to launch a nuclear strike. So the Patriot system combined with whatever arcane shadow tech the military has been keeping secret for nuclear defense, it's unlikely that nukes are going to much of a threat to the US. Apart from that, the huge land mass that produces incredible amounts of food should be able to feed the American populace even if nuclear winter cuts food production by 50%. Canada. Militarily, not the biggest army, but very well trained, experienced officers, and generally good tech. Economically, lots of natural resources to maintain self-sufficiency. Population density is low, which means mobilization for military service is unlikely to be as large-scale as other nations. Canada would most likely serve auxiliary roles for her allies and provide logistical and supply support. Geographically, it's practically impossible to invade. East Coast is rocky and harsh and consists of the bulk of Canada's population and military infrastructure. Any beachhead established would need enormous support to avoid being counterattacked and pushed back into the Atlantic. They'd need more carriers than any nation other than the US has. Coming from the north is just impossible. Even in a time of peace, the logistics required for landing an army and supplying them as they move south would be absolutely astronomical. Weather could easily screw the whole operation. And in a wartime scenario, they'd be super exposed to airstrikes and drones. Coming from the west means crossing the Pacific and then attacking into the Rocky Mountains. That's like combining Vietnam with Afghanistan. All of the above is just stage 1 of a theoretical attack. Stage 2 from the east would mean numerous urban battles in Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. The supply lines required for these would be baffling. Then they'd need to push through the aptly named Canadian Shield. A region of thick forest and jagged rocky terrain with a single shitty road going through it which retreating Canadians could easily blow up. If the enemy does get through that, they'll be in the prairies. Wide open spaces with little to no cover. And they'll have enormous supply lines and virtually no useful infrastructure for hundreds of miles from the front. From the west, they'd get to the prairies after the mountains which would likely still have guerrilla fighters ambushing roads and setting off landslides and avalanches to block supply routes. They'd be in Alberta, the Texas of Canada. Local gun-loving rednecks aside, there are large urban centers they'd need to control, Calgary and Edmonton. They'd need to then push across the rest of the prairies and secure Winnipeg before even thinking of entering the Canadian Shield to get at the major cities in Ontario. Keep in mind, landings would almost necessarily need to happen in the summer, and by the time they hit the prairies, it'd be winter. The prairies have frequently been the coldest place on Earth during their winters. So there's no shot in hell that anybody is ever invading Canada. Except theoretically the US. Even then, the extremely long border would make it difficult to ensure no spearhead counterattacks or tactical blunders. They'd be able to do it, but the manpower needed would just be far more than it could ever be worth. Southern Hemisphere countries, possibly not Australia, though. Peru would be my bet. The first main reason is that northern and southern hemispheres don't exchange airflow, good old Coriolis forces. So, fallout doesn't easily migrate over the equator. That leaves 5 countries as far south as possible. Australia is a big enough power that might attract some action from China. RSA has issues. New Zealand is lovely, and English is the first language, but every other man and his dog are aiming to go there, and I just prefer Peru over Argentina. New Zealand. Nobody could find it, it's not on the map. South Africa. Ironically, the state failure has motivated anyone who can afford it to generate their own electricity and move towards grid independence. Plenty of natural resources and remote areas. Plenty of water, mountains, forests, and desert. After non-involvement in a world war, Africa will thrive. Probably either Australia or northern Canada. Europe is generally a battleground historically, India and China would be at war and a battleground. The US, China, Russia and other major European powers are all at risk of being either invaded or nuked. But Australia and northern Canada are pretty far from anything. I also think South America would be decently safe from the war. Fiji or Barbados. Probably New Zealand, or most of South America. I am in Nakhon nowhere somewhere in Thailand. We have Russian, Arabic, Indian, Euro, Chinese and US tourists, all enjoying relatively peaceful together. No one will invade or drop a bomb here. The funny thing is that the safest place will become very dangerous as everybody flocks to it for safety. World War would come with nukes. Likely more than a few. Not sure safety would be a thing. Bhutan. Chile or to a lesser degree Argentina. Out of the way enough to not be immediately involved with the fighting but developed enough to still offer a decent life there. Borders in South America are also very well aligned with natural geography, so little risk for smaller scale conflicts breaking out alongside the big one. Ethnically and culturally homogeneous enough that infighting within the country is a lot less likely than places like the US, Europe or Brazil. Plus it's a fairly nice place to live in terms of landscape, climate, and culture. Corrupt AF though. New Zealand and South America. You want to be in a self-sufficient country that is out of harm's way. New Zealand. It is far enough away from everything that it would be a hey, we have conquered or glassed every country on earth. Did we miss anywhere? Kind of thing lol. It also has a small enough population that it can survive without foreign trade if required, but large enough that people are not living on top of each other. For what it is worth, Australia would have been my response, but we have really put ourselves out there with our previous government being absolutely terrible at diplomacy. This all but guarantees that we will get hit if WW3 breaks out. New Zealand. Not worth nuking and defended by millions of sheep, so it is invasion proof. Does the op know something we don't? None. A world war would involve nuclear weapons. Once someone starts that, there's nothing left. Mars. I doubt any place would offer enough safety. It would probably be a matter of time before the violence catches up with you. Fire. Mongolia. Canada, especially northern Canada. Nothing to invade, and the world's strongest military is our neighbor and closest ally. And we know how to deal with the cold. Greatest safety, from what exactly? I'll stay in Puerto Rico, my home, and build a bunker with my husband and let my faith be my faith. It's just us, whatever God has in store for us. If nukes were used, they would most likely be dropped mainly in northern part of the globe. US, Russia, China and Europe. The resulting nuclear winter would cause food shortages almost everywhere. Only place where you might still be able to grow some food would be somewhere like Australia, maybe somewhere in South America as well. Until the winner of the nuclear war comes for your food. New Zealand. Find the remotest part of the world and dig a hole, IG. I've heard and read that New Zealand, that's why all the rich fuckers are building bunkers there. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Switzerland. New Zealand, the answer is always New Zealand. Whichever shithole is so unpleasant that nobody wants to come near it? Switzerland. Antarctica. For obvious reasons. St. Kitts and Nevis. Think I'll just stay home. Rand McNally. If, haha geez. Antarctica. Cough Argentina cough. LOL. Nepal, Everest. The U.S. The Patriot missile system or HIMARS, maybe both, I forget, is capable of shooting down hypersonic missiles as evidence in Ukraine. So nukes attached to incoming hypersonic missiles could possibly be shot down. The U.S. is not only massive, it is mostly rural. If at the beginning of a nuclear war, you flee the cities and run to southeast or really any rural state and downwind from nuclear blast zones, you should survive. The war that is, the famine that comes after that I don't know. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you have enjoyed this video and subscribe to never miss an upload.